Welcome to the Legal Insurrection podcast. Today is November 14th, and this is episode 16, and we're excited to be back with you today. I'm Kimberly Kay. I'm the editorial and operations director with the Legal Insurrection Foundation, and I'm here with Professor Jacobson, our president and founder. So much to talk about this week. So last week we were very, very tired after pulling an all-nighter on election night. The election that Trump pulled off amazingly. And so now, a week later, we have a lot of appointments. We're starting to get an idea based on his appointments and who he's wanting in key places about what this second administration is going to look like. And it's shaping up to be vastly different than the first administration. But before we get into the Trump appointments, we have to talk about Trump's visit to the White House and how glowingly happy the Bidens looked upon receiving him. The whole thing was it was borderline comical that they looked so at ease and so relaxed and so happy. And this is someone that they were for months calling Hitler and, talking about how dangerous he was. This is why when I say politics is all theater, this is exactly what I mean. Like, this right here encapsulates that.
Yeah, well, I think this was maybe a little bit more because there is certainly no love lost for Kamala Harris from the Bidens. And there's been all sorts of rumors, semi-confirmed, in fact, I think confirmed, that Biden really stuck it to that ticket. After they removed him, he was not supposed to endorse her right away. Pelosi claimed there was supposed to be some sort of mini primary or something, and he came out and did it anyway. And he really stuck them with a losing candidate. So, and there were multiple times during the campaign at critical moments when she would have a big event, a big media event or a big rally or whatever, and he would step all over it in terms of media. I think he did his first press conference in like a year on the night that she had some big thing going on, some big address to the nation. And then obviously, Jill, I think, has not been happy at all, because she's no longer going to be the president. so, so I think they're quite happy with it. I think they feel vindicated that he should never have been removed. And so I think they would just go, I think they're happy. In some ways, it saved Biden's legacy in an odd way. Her losing, him having been forced out because he supposedly couldn't win the election, and then the person they forced him out for loses, I think in some ways vindicates him.
No, I completely agree. I mean, because now we're not looking at this as a Biden loss. Everyone, and that was the immediate reaction of the liberal press was they would have won if they had left Biden in. And all the think pieces about how Biden could have won and what a terrible decision it was to oust him after all, even though that's the exact opposite of what they were saying when they finally booted him out, right? This is a whole thing. It's just been very comical and very entertaining, if you can call it that, to watch play out. But yeah, I think his best thing that could have happened for Biden and whatever legacy he has is that he gets booted out. And like you said, Kamala loses. So, and I think his whole, everything about his body language seemed to exude that too.
And things that have come out from review of her campaign finance reports shows what a complete phony candidate she was. We said that all along. She's an empty shell. I think I referred to her as a hologram. She paid Oprah $1 million for that appearance, and Oprah says, "No, I wasn't paid anything." Well, your production company was paid $1 million. You don't have to be a liar. She paid Beyonce $10 million, and she didn't even get a song out of her to appear on the stage. And she raised $1 billion, almost 3 times what Trump did, and she ended up 20 million in debt. She was so far beyond a horrible candidate. She may have been the worst candidate, at least in our lifetime, as a presidential candidate. There was nothing there. It was an empty shell of a caricature created by $1 billion and created by Hollywood, and it flopped. And I'm just so happy about that.
Oh, I am too. I mean, and the fact that one of the things I loved about some of the things that have come out post election about her campaign and how many millions they threw at celebrities and influencers and people like that is that they like to present this, I guess, like this fake persona, right? That they're all friends, they all do this stuff together, they're real chummy with one another, and they're not. Like, they have to be paid millions of dollars to show up for anything for these candidates. It's not like they just get on the phone and say, hey, could you do me a favor? Could you come do this and really help rally people around this? That's not the reality of the situation here. They have to
Well,
pay people to show up.
I don't think we can broaden it. They had to pay to show up for her. I don't
Right.
know. Have other candidates, other Democratic candidates, had to pay celebrities to endorse them? I've never heard that before. Maybe it happens, and we don't know about it. But this, I think, was extraordinary. She was so bad a candidate that you had to pay liberal Hollywood and music industry stars to show up for her. And that's
Well,
truly extraordinary.
and to me, like, and some of the campaign post-mortem, and there's so much to say about her campaign just based on, some of the things that have been published. But even the set for some podcast or something like that, I've never heard of, call her daddy or something like ludicrously stupid. That they supposedly spent six figures on something that I guarantee you, I could go into Home Depot and spend $300 and build whatever it is that they built, and they spent over $100,000 to make it look like a waiting room and a hospital. But this is how the campaign spent money. And the fact that they blew through $1 billion, and I mean, like, what, 3 or 4 months, is mind blowing. And that there's still 20 million in debt. There were reports that the last paycheck for her staffers, they were supposed to have been paid for their last 2 weeks. They didn't get paid. There were also reports from the campaign that, and this kind of stuff just makes me chuckle, and it's something you and I write about, see, hear about all the time, is that diversity of opinion was absolutely unwelcome, that Black staffers on her campaign felt like it was a hostile environment to the point where they were concerned about speaking up for retribution. All the while, on the front facing side, we're being told, like, we need to vote for her because she's the first Black woman. She's not even Black, like, but whatever, like this perfect diversity candidate, and everything that comes under this diversity label is being experienced within her campaign, and it's just delicious. All of it is perfect. That and the spending and the $20 million in debt, like, you can't write a drama like this, a political drama like this.
A lot of people got rich off that campaign. Okay,
Oh yeah.
that $1 billion didn't just dissipate into the sky. It was given to people. It was paid to people. A lot of people used her campaign as an absolute feeding frenzy. All the things they accused Trump of, she did 10 times over.
Oh yeah. I mean, he spent a third of what she did and still had money in the bank and won, and even things like, I mean, we see this all the time with all kinds of everything political spending wise, right? But even going back to the set that they built in a hotel room, like, why did she have to fly somewhere to build this in a hotel room? Someone probably went to Home Depot and spent $300 and charged $100,000, right? That this is just nothing short of money laundering, and in the sense that they're paying favors, they're buying buying influence, or what they think is buying influence, and none of it's real. None of it's real. Like I said, it's not like she and Oprah are chummy and Oprah showed up, to help a friend out. She had to pay for that. Same with Beyonce, same with everyone else, same for all of these people that were so cringeworthy, and none of it worked. None of it worked. And which tells me too, and I love that there is a massive disconnect between the Hollywood condescension and the rest of the country. And that's something that I think it's been interesting to me. So in a past life, working more on the political side of things, still knowing a lot of people in the Beltway bubble, even people on the right, as they're watching some of these administrative picks with their hair on fire, going, "But that's not how this works. Trump's never going to be able to do this, and no one's going to confirm them, and this and this and this and this." That is 100% the point. I think he learned from his first term. I think that he cracked the establishment wall in his first term, and now it's time to bulldoze it. I mean, there's just no other way. There's no way anything in this country changes as long as he goes in trying to play by establishment rules. And I say that like establishment on both sides of the aisle, the way that DC works, having to stay inside the lines there, forget all of that. And it looks like, based on his picks, he's not interested in playing that way this time. And I am loving every minute of it.
Yeah, it's fast and furious with his picks.
So, okay, so we can jump into those. We have a whole list here, and I'll just throw off kind of from some of his first picks, and we'll just go down the list and we can discuss these. Border Czar. I am like beyond excited about this one. Tom Homan for Border Czar. What was your initial thought when that was announced?
I don't know a lot about him. I've seen him on TV, but he's, talking tough on the border and he seems ready to do it. And so I think kind of no nonsense. So I think that's a great change because that's certainly what we need. And it certainly has upset the right people. So I think that by all that I can tell, that's a really good pick.
I think one of the things I there was a clip circulating. I think it was him and AOC was questioning him at a hearing and trying to peg him on this idea that um, everything he was advocating for was separation of families, and he would have nothing to do with that, and it just kept reiterating that it was not about separating families. It's no different than what happens. And he even gave the example: if I'm in a car with my child and I get arrested, I am separated from that child while I remain in custody. This is no different. And she kept trying to make it about family separation, which, I mean, I don't know what people think happens at the border or happens at ports of entry, but adults and children are not always housed together. Like, that's just not something that happens. But anyway, I think he's a great pick. Then they had Lee Zeldin for administrator of the EPA.
No huge feelings. I like Lee Zeldin. He came relatively close to winning the governorship in New York, which is
Mm-hmm.
unusual. He came pretty close, and I think he'd probably be fine at EPA. I don't. There was no huge reaction anywhere when he was named to the EPA, so I think he'll do fine there.
No, I think so too. And I know you have a lot more to say on this one. Elise Stefanik for UN ambassador.
Yeah, well, when I think she was, it seems like it was years ago when they made the first announcement of a pick, but I think it was 3 days ago.
Yeah,
We've had so many.
it's
I
true.
think she was the first one announced. Okay, and my first reaction was, why is she doing that? That she was pretty high up in the House Republican caucus. I think number 3 or 4. Uh, you know. I just expected she would want to stay in there, you know. But then when I thought about it a little bit, I said, for her it makes perfect sense. She doesn't want to spend the next several years continuing to fight in the dysfunctional House of Representatives, continuing to make enemies everywhere. The UN ambassador job is a pretty high profile job. I mean, I always think of, Daniel Patrick Moynihan and Jean Kirkpatrick. And it's, been a stepping stone for people to Secretary of State. Madeleine Albright, I think, was UN ambassador. Uh, it has been a low level position in the Biden administration. Do you even know who the UN ambassador is? But so what does she do? She goes there. She doesn't make any domestic enemies, first of all. Okay? She's not fighting with other Republicans. she gets almost uniformly positive press. I mean, UN ambassadors generally get good press in the country. Um, she's high profile, making friends, positive media coverage. And then what does she really want to do? And this is my speculation. I think she wants to be the VP nominee in 2028. And so
Mm-hmm.
she will position herself as a somebody who has international experience, could step into the job if need be. If something would happen to the president. And so I think it makes actually perfect sense for her. She leaves all the infighting of DC behind her, gets positive media, and positions herself potentially. I mean, there's no guarantee she'd get selected, but potentially positions herself to be a VP nominee. I don't think she'd be a presidential nominee, but a VP nominee in 2028.
No, I think so too. And I mean, that was one of the things too that I have been really, I don't want to say impressed is not the right word, but that I think Trump has, I would guess, intentionally picked so much younger talent, of which the Republicans have a pretty deep bench. You know, they have a ton of people doing great things, very specialized in certain fields, very competent, very capable. Contrast that to the Democrats. I mean, Biden was the best that they could muster 4 years ago. That's all they had. You know, there was no one else who was in a place to jump in there. And so, but that there is such a depth of talent there. And I think because this is his last term, because he is, of course, older this time around, to go in and install people who are much younger is not only um, helpful now, but I think it's great moving ahead, right? So these people are already getting a certain kind of experience and they can grow into greater leadership positions as a result. So that's something I really, really liked with some of these picks as well. And it's not about age. I mean, I don't care how old someone is as long as the job gets done well. But it is important to look beyond this election. You know, it's important to look down the road to, okay, Trump is his own anomaly, but who carries on after him, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing happen with some of this. Uh, Susie Wiles, chief of staff.
She was obviously in a powerful position that I think either co-chair or chair of his campaign. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but you didn't see much of her. I mean, that was really
Yeah, she was
strange.
pretty
For
behind the
old
scenes.
timers, for old timers like me, there's a nice connection. This probably will mean nothing to you. She's Pat Summerall's daughter. Do you know
I
who
had
Pat
no
Summerall?
idea. Yes, but
Look
I
him
had
up.
no idea.
Oh yeah, I mean, and there was a photo passed around. I forget who did it. Some well-known person, news person, passed it around of her with her father kicking a football. Anyway,
That's
I just thought
amazing.
that as somebody who grew up and Pat Summerall was somebody as kids we all looked up to, it's just interesting to see that connection. I think she'll be fine. I mean, we don't know. It's a tough job, but there were really, I think, no leaks from the campaign. I mean, that's what dogged him his first term.
Hmm.
People constantly leaking. So I think it's probably a solid pick.
Yeah, I mean, usually it translates pretty well from campaign work to administration work, but we'll see. I do love the reaction to all because of course many of the things that they have claimed about Trump are just not true, how misogynistic he is, all of these things. He always promotes people regardless of all of these things that he supposedly hates, I mean, even looking at Scott Pressler as being such a massive and instrumental part of the Trump campaign and for all the hair on fire about gay rights, like it's just not true. None of it's true. He doesn't seem to discriminate or care because he promotes people regardless. So, but I think that was an interesting discussion that was happening online as well about the fact that he picked her to be the first female chief of staff, which is pretty notable. Not that I care because I've said before and I'll say it again. I don't particularly think it's an accomplishment for a woman to do something first than a man has been doing for a very long time. That's just me. I don't think it's logically consistent. I don't think it's dazzling or amazing. I mean, someone's already done it before, so good job, you know. But it matters to a lot of other people. So, and then Stephen Miller is back in the administration again. He was in Trump term one, and he was tapped to be the assistant to the president and deputy chief of staff for policy again.
Yeah, well, he was the most hated person when it came to immigration policy in the first term. I think he was there the entire term. He was one of those few people who was there from day one to the last day of that first term.
And
Obviously,
hated
very
every
tight.
single day of it. Yeah, or
Oh
he
God, they hate him so
yeah, they
much. They
hated
hate
him
him
so
so
much.
much. It's crazy. And so I think that's a strong signal that Trump is not going to be backing down on immigration issues. And, he is the one who presumably was behind in the first term the attempt to limit immigration from certain countries, which was uh, misleadingly called the Muslim ban. Okay, just like they came up with the don't say gay law to a law in Florida that had nothing to do with saying gay. So they come
Right.
up with these phrases that supposedly gives them some moral high ground, but the restriction on immigration from I think it was 7 countries who were on Obama's list of high risk terrorist
Mm-hmm.
countries. So he wisely took Obama's list, okay, and used it, and then they called it a Muslim ban, even though
Yeah.
90% of the Muslim world was not on the list. But yes, I think he's going to
Right.
push forward, and I presume he'll be on TV a lot. He's always on TV, even now. And so, yeah, I think that's a really good sign, and they can keep on hating him.
Yeah. I mean, he's used to it, right?
Yep.
um, Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor. I don't know much about him.
Yeah, I didn't know much about him. I don't know much about him. You know, when you don't get, negative hysteria from the other side, it means the person, is probably, taint free. And I've not heard any criticism of it. It's kind of strange.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody seems to have criticized it that I've heard. I'm sure there are people, but there's no real media or Democratic Party pushback on him.
And then Marco Rubio for Secretary of State.
I think
I'm
that's a
actually
good job
glad.
for him.
Yeah,
I think he's kind of played out as senator. Okay,
I do too.
he's never going to be president. Okay, um, and so I think that's a really good pick. I think that's a role that will suit him, and I so I think that's a good pick, and I'm happy for him.
I am
I think
too. That was as soon as I saw that announcement, I'm like, good for him. He's worked really hard. He was one of those two. I mean, it seems like ancient history now that came up in the Tea Party movement. And at the time, the work I was doing there was able to interview him and interact with him quite a bit. And he and his wife really are just good people through and
I think
through.
you interviewed him at some place for us.
I probably did. I think I probably
Yeah,
did 10 years ago.
yeah.
So,
I think it
yeah.
was. It was early. You met him at some conference or some event, and I
Yeah, I
remember us
did. That's
posting a
right. I
short
forgot about
video
that.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain we do. I'll have to dig back into the blog archives and find it. But they are just good people. And I mean, unfortunately for him, his campaign completely unraveled last time around when he started attacking Trump because I don't know what it is about Trump, but you just can't do that and win. It just doesn't work. And it
Well,
was just so out of
being
character for him.
being branded as Little Marco,
It didn't help.
there
It
was
just,
low
yeah,
energy Jeb and Little
it's so, I know.
Marco.
Because I was watching something the other day and I actually had completely forgotten that Jeb Bush even ran and kind of forgot that he existed. And then I started remembering all of the nicknames that Trump had for these people at these debates, and they were hilarious. But Rubio, part of why it tanked him, I think, is because it's so far out of his normal character to be that way.
Yeah.
He seems to be very conciliatory. He's very diplomatic, which is why being put in a diplomatic post is perfect for him. And outside of that, I think other countries, the people that matter, and other places will really enjoy working with him too. I think he speaks very well of America, being from a family of Cuban immigrants. It's just, there's a whole lot there that I think is just a really good pick. But like you said, that was my very first reaction to, was like, good for him. He
Yeah.
finally, he needs this. This is, he's worked hard to get here. So I think that's a great pick. Christy Nome for Secretary of Homeland Security.
Yeah, my dog did not react well upon hearing that. So, yeah, not a huge fan of hers. Okay. Um, I think I forget what it was, but there was something during one of the campaigns where I was not happy with stuff she said. I don't even remember what it was. Yeah, it's a reward for being loyal to Trump.
Yeah, I think so too. That said, though, I do know the person who is going to be her chief of staff, and that gives me great confidence that at least, from that side of things, I think it will be managed well. Um, Very, very bright, very intelligent, very thoughtful individual. So I think there is at least that. Um, Mike Huckabee, ambassador to Israel.
I think that's a great choice. I mean, you know, ambassadors can be either enforcers or cheerleaders for the country they're visiting, and I think he will unquestionably be a cheerleader. So that is a signal that the Trump administration um, is going to be very pro-Israel because he's not being sent there to beat up on Bibi. Okay,
Right.
he's
To twist some
being
arms.
he's being sent there to send a message to the Arab world, I believe, that we are rock solid behind Israel. And so our ambassador is not going to be the guy who goes there, as it is now, and tries to pressure Israel to give concessions. So I think that's good. Always liked Mike Huckabee. Obviously he's a little bit of a TV personality nowadays, but his daughter's even better than he is, and
Yeah, he's a
he's
little
very
cheesy, but not in a bad way, in an
yeah.
endearing way.
In his he is always been a very strong supporter of Israel in a very religious sense. Okay, and so I think that's interesting. It's important, I think, um, for the world to see and also people to see that you've got a religious Christian ambassador who is very pro Israel,
Yeah.
and I think that's a really important message because I don't even know who the ambassador is now, but during Trump's first term, the ambassador was David, and I'm forgetting his Friedman.
Hmm.
Jewish, religious Jewish, and I think it's really important to have a religious Christian in that role.
Right. No, I mean, I think it says a lot in a lot of different ways too. And he's just seems to be of such a personality, and he's not ignorant to the way these things work. Being a former governor, I mean, he's well versed in government and politics, and overall is just a very positive person. And I think that'll be really, like you said, a really great thing to see on the global stage as well. To have someone so just say kind. I don't know him personally, but he seems very genuinely kind and amiable and positive in general. And so I think that's a great pick. It's kind of interesting, but the more I thought about it, I'm going, no, that makes sense. I think that'll work. Stephen Witkoff, sorry, can't read. Special envoy to the Middle East.
Yeah, so I would refer to him as kind of like the Jared Kushner of this administration, a guy who has no real known political background, no government service, or at least none that's notable. He's basically a real estate guy from New York who is friends with Trump. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
a successful real estate guy in New York, and some of the comments, oh, how is he gonna, solve the Middle East. How's he going to? Well, Jared had no diplomatic background. Jared had no government, and he got the Abraham Accords done. Okay,
Hmm.
and if Trump had won um, the a second term, or now that we're seeing how the votes went, if Trump had been not been denied a second term, um, I think the Middle East would look very different today. I really do.
Right.
And so I think Steve Woodcock is probably going to be a Jared Kushner type, somebody who is used to doing business, used to doing deals, and is going to push for an expansion of the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords being where I think it was three Arab states essentially made peace with Israel. I think
Hmm.
they were Gulf states. So I think that's a good choice. He's going to be criticized as he doesn't have the background. He wasn't in the foreign service. He wasn't doesn't have a master of foreign whatever from Johns Hopkins. But all those losers have turned the Middle East into a disaster.
Right.
Okay, they've done nothing. So I think that's a good choice. I think it's a good choice. It couldn't be worse than what we have now.
I completely agree. John Ratcliffe, director of CIA.
I remember him, from the first administration. I think he was a congressman at the time, but he
Hmm.
might have then moved into the administration. Uh, Nobody's really criticizing that. I think that's,
Yeah.
he'll sail through. So that sounds like a pretty solid choice for Trump.
And then of this one, we're starting to get into some of the more contentious ones now.
We save
Um,
them for the end. Okay.
we did Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense.
Look, I mean, from what I can tell, he's a good guy. Got a lot of military service, a lot of experience. Obviously, bright guy, very bright guy. Uh, that role of Secretary of Defense in recent decades has basically been a revolving door for the um, uh, what would it call the arms industry, the whatever the Raytheons and
Military
the
industrial complex.
military industrial. So, you know, I think that, and even the military guys, the retired generals who go into that position, they come off the board of, Lockheed Martin and move into that position and
Hmm.
then they go back. And so I don't think it's a bad idea. I think the challenge is going to be for him. It's such a massive organization. I mean, basically, he's head of the Pentagon, and all these armed services branches, and he's going to have a learning curve because being a good soldier in a platoon is not quite the same as dealing with our nuclear submarine fleet and our you know bombers who are constantly in the air, and there's a lot more to it. But I don't see any reason why he can't come up to it. I mean, certainly a lot of these other people who've been in that role didn't have that background. Okay. Was it Leon Panetta? I think was
Hmm.
at some point, I mean, who are so I'm not sure it's the most logical choice for Trump. There presumably were former generals who are aligned with Trump. Um, but I think it's his way of saying that we're not going to do business the same old. And the military is a mess. I mean, the military, and I say that with sadness. Um,
Yeah.
you know, Jim Nault writes about that a lot for our website. He's was career Navy and was a submarine commander. You know, something's got to be shaken up there. We got to get rid of the DEI. We got to focus on fighting. We've got to focus on, being a military, okay, what a
Right.
military is supposed to be. And I think he'll be good for all those things. And so I'm willing to, give him the benefit of the doubt that he can fill that role.
Well, and he looks like someone too that younger men could aspire to be like. That has not been the case in the Biden administration.
No, I mean you've got complete ridiculousness. The recruiting is down. They're demoralized, um, and
The
obviously the
vaccine
army.
mandates too
You
gutted.
know, it's not it's not World War II where the soldier on the ground is doing the bulk of the fighting. I mean, everything's a lot more high tech now, and drones and all that. So it's different. But uh, you know, that ethos of being a fighting force, at least from what I'm able to tell, has, if not been lost, has at least been severely damaged, and it's being reflected in the poor recruiting, where they can't even fill crews for things. And I saw some statistics that an incredibly high percentage, and I don't remember what it was, but it kind of shocked me when I heard it, of um, people who serve, in combat units are the children of people who served in combat units. I mean,
Yes.
it's a very, family lineage sort of thing, and that's close to being broken now. And
Yeah, I
and
mean, it
hopefully we
really
can restore that.
it is, and I think a lot of it has been the war on men in this country, which we've talked about a lot. I know I've talked about a lot, especially over the last decade, that there's been a concerted effort to emasculate and to devalue men in our country. And I think that's reflected here too. It's definitely um, an intended consequence of that particular effort. And so, I mean, it's like when I look at the criticism for some of these people and how they don't have the experience and they don't have this and they don't have that, there's no one who's going to be perfect in all of this. But I think if we keep this in from the lens of the fact that it really looks like Trump is serious on gutting much or many of these institutions,
Hmm.
why not? Like these people would be perfect if you're coming at it from that point of view. And I just don't buy the Washington speak that they're not experienced enough, because experience for what? Yes, there's some working knowledge that's required, but really for these types of things, you have to have a good understanding, you have to have good working knowledge, but you have to be a good decision maker and be able to solve problems. And there's plenty of people more than capable of doing that. And I mean, at the same time, no one's suggesting anyone better either. So Tulsi Gabbard, director of national intelligence.
Yeah, I think that's one that I'm not really thrilled with. Okay. I think a lot, there have been so many rumors about her, and you can't put faith in those because there's a lot of, deliberate smear campaigns. Um,
Right.
but that's a pretty important role. I mean, that person has access to everything. Okay. All the main spy agencies report to that office. And I would feel a lot more comfortable. I will feel a lot more comfortable if there is a detailed assessment of her. And if she
Right.
passes, fine. But she's just done some weird stuff in the past, like her trip many years ago to visit Assad in Syria. Okay.
Yeah, that was a
Uh,
big thing. And then she was pretty
you know,
chummy with Iran as
You
well.
know, so I'm not against her, but I would feel a lot better if there is a full intelligence agency assessment.
No, I'm with you there. I mean, I don't really have strong feelings one way or the other, but I definitely think there's some questions that need to be answered before I could put this in the category of, sure, sounds like a great idea. Because there's
Yeah.
things that we've watched with her over the years, even running for president on the Democratic ticket. That was not long ago. Which
Mm.
again, I mean, this is not a traditional Republican coalition. This is a very different sort of thing that Trump is building in. I wouldn't even call it populism necessarily. It's not a traditional populist movement. I think one of the things, and I don't mean to be so critical of some of the Beltway Republicans, but I kind of am, because there's just things that need to be understood, is that whatever, it's like I remember even 10 years ago, we're all debating conservatism and the merits of conservatism, and then Trump gets elected and blows a hole in all of it, right? Because this was definitely not a conservative movement. And I think there's many people in this particular part of Republican politics that keep wanting to squeeze things back into this mold of conservative Republicans and conservative reforms. That mold doesn't exist anymore. it's gone. And that way of doing things and that way of viewing things and that way of seeing the world, some of those things can translate into the problems that we have now and the issues that we're dealing with now. But that very particular, very rigid mold, it just doesn't exist. And, you know, anyway, I had a point that I was going to, and then I looked back at my notes and so that's what I get for trying to multitask. So this one, of course, has the entire internet ablaze. Matt Gaetz for Attorney General.
Yeah, well, I said my piece about him on Chicago's Morning Answer this morning, which is posted on our website. Um, it's a little strange to pick, okay? Um, I don't think he was on anybody's mind as a potential attorney general. Um, it just strikes me as bizarre. And then he resigns quickly from the Congress so that the ethics committee can't finish its report on him. I've heard,
Allegedly.
well, I mean, they have a report and it was scheduled to near completion.
Today.
And once you resign, and a Democrat did this also, I can't remember who it was, a congresswoman from uh, Katie something or other from California resigned a few days, you know.
Mhm.
So something just strikes me as strange here. Um, so I'm just not sure. I think what it clearly is Trump saying that he wants his guy in that spot and he wants somebody who's going to be loyal. And considering what the Justice Department, including the FBI, did to him his first term, can you blame him? Now, whether Getz is the right person, I don't know, but you know, literally from day one, in fact, somewhat before day one, they were trying to, you know, uh, freeze his presidency and get him out. Remember, 2 or 3 days into his administration, James Comey just happened to pop in to say hello. Okay, and it
Mm-hmm.
later came out that that was done because they figured if they don't get to Trump early, if they don't get to him before he's got a White House counsel, if they go through normal channels, they won't be able to do what they wanted to do. And what they wanted to do is set him up. And they
Yep.
wanted to set him up so to talk about the Steele dossier, which CNN already had, but CNN was unwilling to go public with it. Okay. And so Comey comes in and says, "Oh, Mr. President, there's this dossier, and we don't know if it's, we don't put any credence in it, but it accuses you of all these things." And that he then contacts CNN and says, "I've spoken to the president about it." CNN now has the news hook it needs and runs the story. The
Mm-hmm.
president has been briefed on a dossier, okay? And that's was this phony Steele dossier, peeing on the bed that Obama slept in Moscow, which obviously was false.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there was, hooker stuff in there, but all sorts of crazy stuff. Um, and I mean, that's how it started. That's how his relationship with the Department of Justice via the director of the FBI. And the director of the FBI is very frequently as high profile as the attorney general. Okay.
Right.
And and then they got Mueller appointed. And it was one thing after another. They basically froze his first term.
Yeah.
They sabotaged his first term. And then they went after him after he left on legal theories which have not held up so far and will never get to trial because they're dropping things. Always considered, and I've been on record since day one, that the Jack Smith, and they put Jack Smith as the special counsel, they name him as the special counsel. Jack Smith is notoriously for being overly aggressive. He's had many very high profile cases that got thrown out by the Supreme Court because he came up with novel legal theories, including the former governor of Virginia, okay, and who was cleared in the Supreme Court, but by then his political career was over. I
Mm-hmm.
forget the guy's name. You know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
And so that that legal theory in DC never made any sense to me. It was a conspiracy to overturn the election, but that's not illegal. I've been saying this from day one. It's not illegal to seek to overturn an election.
Right.
And so, and then they brought the Mar-a-Lago charges down in Florida, which were thrown out. Okay. And everybody, not everybody, I was very critical of that raid from day one, that it really was
Right.
unnecessary. Okay. You didn't need a commando style raid. Okay. Um, and, uh, and there was never a claim that those classified documents were at risk of somebody having, foreign spies having access to them. It was all
Right.
hypothetical. They could break into Mar-a-Lago and they could do this, but not that they actually had. Okay,
And
um,
someone could steal the Declaration of Independence, but it hasn't happened.
that's
It's
right.
like,
And certainly Joe Biden leaving stuff in his garage unattended. So the Department of Justice has had basically an 8-year jihad against Donald Trump.
true.
Remember the lovers, Struck and whatever her name were, texting each other about how much they hate Trump. I mean,
Hmm.
and so he's back in office. You think he's just going to put a regular, you know, DOJ type back in that role so they can spend the next 4 years going after him? No, he wants his person in there. And if that's what he's looking for, and I think it's a legitimate concern that his DOJ not be able to sabotage his presidency this time like they
Yeah.
did, the first term, to put his guy in there. And Getz is a loyalist. Okay,
Yeah.
back, he broke with DeSantis very early on to endorse Trump. That was a
Hmm.
risky move at that time because at that time DeSantis was very high in the polling.
Right.
And there's a guy. Oh, why am I forgetting names all of a sudden? He runs a podcast. I watched him a lot through the election. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your name. Fairly prominent guy, and he said, the cartoonish character of Matt Getz is not the Matt Getz that I know. Okay.
Right.
And I wish I could remember his name. He did a lot about the elections. I watched him a lot. He, had pollsters on there. And of course, the second we're done, I'll remember his name. But he tweeted today that, that is not the Matt Getz I know. Okay.
Right.
And the Matt Getz I know is extremely smart,
Hmm.
extremely driven, extremely tactical. And so maybe the cartoonish character of Matt Getz, the smears against him. He was investigated for almost 2 years by the FBI and no charges ever brought. But of
Yeah.
course, when the left wing media announces he's the nominee, they start with the chart with the accusations that were thoroughly investigated and never led to criminal charges, which were
Yes.
very serious accusations if true. Okay. Uh, and so maybe the Matt Getz we see, as what's his name? I got to remember, John something or other, is not really who he is. Maybe Trump knows him better than we know him, and so
Right.
I'm willing to see what happens.
Well, and I mean, I think same thing that we talked about with Trump, and same thing I've said about Trump. If they had something on it, they would have taken him out by now, and they
Yeah,
haven't. So that whatever they think they have and whatever's being thrown out there, I mean, look at all the idiocy that was talked about with Trump and all these people coming forward. And I'm not saying that there's not merit to these things. I'm saying that if they had it, he would be gone, and he's
yeah.
not.
So it's Mark
And
Halperin, Mark
oh
Halperin.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
just found his quote on Twitter. And I'll read it because it's worth it. Those of you who think he's evil, that because he's faced investigations and that he's corrupt, who think that he's not a serious person, I disabuse you of those things. Um, I've spent enough time with him to know that the cartoon of who he is not true. So maybe Trump knows him better than we know him. And so I'm
Yeah.
willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's certainly not, doesn't fit the mold, but he's certainly not going to stab Trump in the back.
And I 100% agree that this is a loyalty thing. I think we also have to keep in mind too. Trump has had 4 years on the sidelines. He's had 4 years to plot, to think, to plan. Like, I don't think that decisions that he makes concerning some of these things would be half-hearted. I think he was burned tremendously his first term, and I think he's going to do everything he can to prevent being in that situation again. Especially going into his second term, like, he can just go scorched earth, because what's going to happen? He's not going to win re-election. He can't run again anyway. So
Although he did, this is so funny. This is so wonderful. He did joke, I think, when he met with Biden about going for a third term, and of course,
yes.
all of the liberals go crazy.
So true.
He knows how to push their buttons. It was to any normal person, it was obviously a joke, okay,
Right.
but it set them off. There's even legislation that's being. A couple of Democratic congressmen want the Congress to issue a declaration that he can't do that. I mean, it's in the
Right.
Constitution. You don't need a congressional resolution. But I mean, oh my God, this is going to be, his term hasn't even started. Okay. It feels like he's been in office for the second time for months already.
I
And he
know, it
hasn't
really
even
does. This last week has been months. Just with the reactions and everyone leaving Twitter, X, whatever, it will always and forever be Twitter, because they're not getting their way and it's not a good place. I mean, we started off on Twitter when it was a conservative bastion, and then we fought with
Yeah.
Media Matters all the time. And I was so surprised to learn that people actually care about what Media Matters thinks still before the election. But anyway,
Yeah.
and we suffered through all the years of censorship and all that kind of stuff, and we're still there. Like, we're
Yeah.
still there. It's just so silly to me. But like I said, I am confident in the fact that whether it's, Tulsi or Matt Gaetz or whomever else, if there was something enough to bring them down, they would have been taken out by now. They just would have. We would have known that. They've known that Gaetz has been close to Trump for how long? This is not a recent thing. And he's been in Congress this whole time too. And I think he's 100% loyal to Trump. He's also been on the other end of this DOJ witch hunt, right? Of sorts. So he knows better than anyone else what it's like to bear the brunt of political partisanship driven to an extreme degree. And it's like, by contrast, we have Merrick Garland, who's been sitting there basically running interference for Hunter Biden and weaponizing the DOJ for 4 years. So I'm not particularly, I'm not over here cheerleading at this pick. I just don't think it's terrible. I just don't. And I really don't think with something as important as the DOJ that that he's going to put someone in there that he doesn't have complete and total faith in, that's not smart and capable and competent enough, because he also doesn't want it to turn into a situation where it's a laughing stock. So,
Yeah.
And then moving on to my most favorite pick so far, RFK for the Secretary of HHS.
Yeah, that just came out this afternoon. That's, an earthquake in many ways.
Yes.
Um, I'll be very curious to see what's happening to the pharmaceutical stocks and the
Oh,
food
they
company
tanked. You didn't
stocks.
see this? Big Pharma
No,
has tanked, completely
yeah,
tanked since this announcement. So,
and yeah, I mean, it's that's going to shake things up. I am surprised because during the campaign, when RFK announced, Trump specifically mentioned, even with RFK Jr. there, some position, a special advisor on something where it didn't say you're going to be in the cabinet. Okay. Didn't say you're
right.
going to, you know, um, be the head of what might be the biggest agency in the government. I don't know, other than maybe the Pentagon, other than the military. Health and Human Services
Budget
is
wise,
massive. Is massive.
yes.
Includes
Yes.
the FDA, National Institutes for Health, all those things.
Medicaid,
And
Medicare.
oh yeah, I mean, so um, obviously, he can't change everything, but it's going to set a tone. So that's a real shakeup. But if you remember, I know I did a hot take on this. We might have discussed it during the podcast. I think it was in August when RFK Jr. went out on stage with Trump during that announcement. And
Hmm.
I said, this changed the whole dynamic of the race. It
Totally.
breathed new life into the Trump campaign. It, at that point, Kamala, are we allowed to call her Kamala now without being accused of being
I
racist?
never, I
Kamala.
don't,
I'm going
yes,
back to Kamala. Okay, what we
yeah.
called her before she got the nomination, Kamala. Um, you know, uh, she was still on the rise. Okay, and RFK breathed, and the Trump campaign was still running against Joe Biden. And he breathed
Right.
life. He breathed energy into that campaign, and he probably brought enough people over, might have been a quarter of a percent or a half a percent, but look at all these swing states. They didn't get that made a difference. So I think this
And
is Trump recognizing, and rewarding him and going above and beyond what was promised to him.
I don't even see it so much as a campaign reward in the traditional sense, because in tapping RFK, it also helped to atone, at least for the anti-COVID vax people and that whole world of universe of Americans who were just so incensed by what happened in the COVID years, that Trump actually had a hand in rolling out some of these vaxes. I think he was probably snookered on some of that too. But regardless, to have someone come in who has filed how many complaints about vaccination harm and things like that over the years, in this whole world of food safety, like we've talked about before,
And
for me,
that's
that's
a big issue for you.
it is
That
a
food,
huge issue
food.
for me because I don't like that our grocery stores are full of poison and toxins and things that are banned all over the world, and we pretend like they're consumable food. They're not even food. It's like we walk past some things and my kids are like, "Can we have that?" I'm like, "No,
Oh
that's not
yeah.
food. I don't even
Well,
know what it is."
yeah. Admit it. You do eat candy corn for Halloween.
I do like candy corn. I'll make the exception for candy corn.
Is
you
there
know,
anything that we ingest that's less food-like than candy corn? It's basically like
probably not.
colored candles,
I was gonna say it's probably like flavored colored wax, but it's bad. But and it's one thing, like every culture has their things that are not so great. You have your treats, you have whatever, and I am absolutely 100% opposed to banning things for people's health. We've seen that New York went on this bender for a while where they were trying to ban sodas and all kinds of stuff, especially for people using, what was it, like the equivalent of the food stamp card in New York State. There's so many things like that happening. I'm not suggesting anything like that. What I am suggesting is that there are chemicals that we know wreak havoc on the body, and we shouldn't be allowing them in food. Like, it's just that simple, because you would be penalized for other known chemicals if they ended up in the food supply and it's the same. But it's not just that. I mean, it's this whole world of how we look at health and wellness. If you look at, I mean, there's so many data points about how unhealthy our our country is and the population in our country is. Um, but all of that aside, if we look at who he is and the way he presents himself, he's very no nonsense. He's very to the point. He's very data driven. Um, and so I think in that regard, he's also, I mean, a lot of people think he's very hokey for a lot of reasons, but a lot of people don't. There's a lot of people who completely agree with everything that he says, or at least partially agree with what he says, or at least have enough distrust in the system to see that what he says might possibly be true. Um, whether it's fluoridated water or vaccinations or whatever. This is a whole world of things, though, and I think we have to remember, like you said, like this has, I think, the largest budget, maybe if I'm remembering correctly, of all of the government agencies, and is so massive and sprawling that I think it's going to be a Herculean task. But it's an area where he's also, he's been steeped in this for a very, very long time. So personally, I'm really excited about it. I think because finally on the national stage, some of the things that are important to me and my family are finally getting airtime, and being given attention. So I'm curious to see how this all plays out, um, in the long run. Of course, these people still have to be confirmed. I'll be curious to see what the
Yeah,
politics.
that's another issue we didn't really have time to get into is who's not going to get confirmed.
Well,
But
and
we
I'm
don't.
wondering, I wonder too, though, if coming in, if the Senate would willingly defy some of the appointments. I also have to think, going back to, what we were talking about, how Trump has had 4 years to plot and plan on the side. They have to have a plan. They're not just going to pluck people out and toss them out there on a whim, hoping that they'll have the votes to get them through. Like,
Maybe, maybe I'm
maybe.
not so convinced.
As soon as I said that, I'm like, well, he actually might. But I don't know. I like to think that they're a little bit more thoughtful than that, but who knows? Maybe they're just confident in their ability to whip votes to get this through because they have the mandate. And do you really want to be the guy voting against RFK? Who's trying to save children from cancer because of toxins in the water supply? I wouldn't. Well, that's just me, but I'm also not a politician. So, um, and then, this I absolutely love, the Department of Government Efficiency. And so I kept seeing this on Twitter as Doge, right? Which is a very old meme if you're not familiar with the history of internet memes. And I'm like, what is everyone talking about here? What is this? Where is this coming from? And then when I find out that's actually the Department of Government Efficiency, I'm like, was there ever a more perfect thing that's happened in American politics? And I don't think there is. And Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are going to be heading that up. And I think, and they're not getting paid, which is also hilarious too, because the criticism, really the only criticism, has been, well, there will be two people leading an efficiency department. What a waste of money. And the retort from Elon Musk, at least on Twitter, has just been that they're not getting paid. They're doing it for free. So let it burn. And I think that's going to be very, very interesting.
So Doge, when I heard it, there's a cryptocurrency that I think Elon has been involved in. And so I thought that was the joke that he was, Doge and his cryptocurrency Doge, and there's an account who he's constantly retweeting called Doge. So that's what
Uh-huh.
I thought the kind of joke was, that he's been promoting Doge, which was a crypto coin named after a dog. Okay, Doge as in dog, and so uh, which shows you the frivolity of so much of the crypto markets. It's not Bitcoin, but they put a dog's face on a coin, and now it's a crypto coin, and it's really weird. So I thought that's what the joke was.
No, I mean, I think I thought about that too, but of course the first thing that came to mind for me was the dog. And they've teased that they're going to have merchandise, which I think would just be hilarious too. Um, but I think it's going to be, I don't know. I think it's going to be great. Of course, they're drawing a lot of ire. They're supposed to have a leaderboard, presumably. And so to track who's the most wasteful, which is kind of like a reinvention. Years ago, there was always, I think Senator Tom Cotton's office had picked it up. Who had it before? It may have been Jeff Sessions, or it
No,
might be.
no, I know who you're talking. It was
No,
from,
you know who I'm talking about.
yeah,
You
it
know
was,
who I'm talking about. It wasn't
yeah,
Sessions. What it was?
with a C, with a C.
Yeah, but you know who I'm talking about. But anyway, that they would always do a report on, government waste. It would be a massive government waste report, and they would have, the greatest offenders. We would spend gazillions of dollars on, like masks for monkeys or whatever. It'd always be something really atrocious and exorbitantly wasteful. And they would put together these reports. And so I think this is going to be more like a real time report. And they have the platform, they have the social media following to really blow these things up, in ways that need to be getting more attention, especially with the economy like this and inflation being so high. Inflation being driven, there are many factors that play into it, but also being driven by government bloat and government spending um, playing a huge role in that. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they handle this.
I think it was Tom Coburn had it.
Tom Coburn, that's who it was. That's who it was. Thank you for Googling that. I could see his
No,
face.
actually, I didn't find it on Google. As I was searching on Google, I remembered Tom Coburn from Oklahoma.
Oh, whatever.
He used to have these every year. He'd issue a report on the biggest waste in government.
Yes, yes. And so, but yeah, and I think it's a very different era too in politics that we have the people involved that are involved and the platforms in which to share these things on social media in a very different way. And I really think, and I'm actually certain of this, part of what scares the left and the progressives and that whole agenda so much is that there are so many people involved in these efforts that have the ability to go directly to the people. They're not contingent upon the screening and censorship of the national media, of cable news, or any of these traditional outlets. They can take what they know and the work that they're doing and present it directly to the American people. Um, and I'm sure that has a lot of them shaking in their boots. But, if they were doing what they should be doing, they wouldn't have to be afraid, and they would have nothing to fear. And all of the tweets I've seen just anecdotally talking about how, at least, with HHS, people are trying to figure out what they're going to do. They're going to quit en masse. I mean, I think that's pretty much the point here. Like,
Yeah.
that is the broader point. They're wanting to get these things because the administrative state has grown so much. It's so massive and so huge. And really, at every single level of government is the vehicle for soft totalitarianism. We see that even like at the local level in schools, that the administrative part of it has grown so large compared to the number of teachers that they're hiring, the number of students that they have, that it's so out of balance. And then we just have a lot of people getting paid a lot of money to bat around terrible ideas and justify their existence. And as a result, this is what we have, like our current situation. So, um, but I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm curious to see their leaderboard. I'm curious to see how all of that's going to play out. Um, whether they're going to be working in more of an advisory capacity, uh, or not. I think we still have a lot of questions there that we'll find out as time goes on. But Elon did say that he would do a weekly live stream on the progress, and I think those will be very interesting to see, government in real time there and all the things that are getting cut. So, I mean, I think that's it. We have a couple more post positions, but I think they're a little less significant than some of what we've discussed. But do you have any parting thoughts on any of this?
No, other than it's going to be a long 4 years. I mean, one thing about Trump is he's nonstop. He runs around the clock and he exhausts people. And we've only been at this a week, really. And it feels like it's been a year.
One of my favorite pictures, someone had posted or had tweeted this, that it was Trump when he had all of those college football players to the White House, and he's standing there like this, with a table full of McDonald's. And someone had
Yeah.
said Trump welcoming RFK to the White House, which I just thought was absolutely hilarious. Um,
Yeah.
but I think you're right. There's just so many moving things. There's so much energy. The people that he have tapped for many of these roles have a very similar energy, and that they're pretty nonstop too. Um,
I mean, for all those people, and I've said this to a couple of people who were a little bit down on some of his choices, just think what the choices would have been if Kamala had won.
oh,
We
100%.
would be, so you're not thrilled with somebody, fine. Okay. You don't think they were the greatest pick, fine. Just think what this would have looked like had she been doing the picking. You would have had the most insanely radical, anti American nominees to these positions whose job would have been to destroy the society.
Yeah.
And so, whatever issues we have with the Trump nominees, think about what the alternative would have been. And people should have a smile on their face and should maybe cut some of these nominees a little bit of slack when you take that into account.
Well, yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. And again, would just encourage people, if you do have this particular hang up of, and I'm not trying to dog old fashioned Republicanism. It's not that, but just that the landscape has changed, right? And what the challenges that we're facing now are not the challenges that we had 10, 12 years ago. You know, our country has been dismantled before our eyes under both Republican and Democratic leadership. And so there have to be some substantial changes. There have to be some dramatically different ways of doing things and looking at things if we're going to, if like truthfully and not hyperbolically, but if we're going to survive as a nation. And so I'm open to what that looks like. I think obviously we'll be able to tell in time, but I completely agree. I mean, even looking at what the Biden administration, the joke of his appointees, you know,
Yeah.
and we do have people that he's selected, of course, all subject to confirmation, most of them, um, that seem to care deeply, seem to be devoted to what Trump is trying to accomplish. And I mean, I'm not one ever to put my faith in institutions, politicians, or government, but I think a lot of this speaks well of things to come. And so I'm excited to kind of get to that point, um, and see what they start to do when they're finally sworn in. So we will
Okay.
see.
Great.
But all right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and knowledge as always. And thank you for listening. We will put a whole bunch of links in here too. We cover all of this judiciously at legalinsurrection.com. So check us out there if you haven't. If you enjoy listening to our podcast, please like, share, subscribe, do all of those things. Click all the buttons, just not the ones that are pointing downwards. And you can find more about this episode at legalinsurrection.com/16. And we will be back next week. Thanks, y'all. Goodbye.